Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Nadhim Zahawi, appointed 6 months ago as the minister charged with overseeing the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, also a government business minister. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, formerly Shadow Security Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds. Richard Walker, boss of the Iceland Foods supermarket chain, environment campaigner and author of The Green Grocer, a book on corporate activism. Joining us down the line, Professor Devi Sridhar, Chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh and a member of the Scottish Government's Advisory Group on Coronavirus. And businesswoman, former CEO of IBM Asia Pacific and of Thomas Cook, winner of multiple awards, including from the Women in Technology Institute, Harriet Green. Good evening, welcome to you at home, welcome to my guests here in the studio, welcome to Professor Devi Sridhar, who's joining us down the line from Edinburgh, good to see you, and of course welcome to our QT50, our virtual audience. Who knows, we might get an audience, a real audience in the studio soon, one day. Nadhim, I'm sure you're the man to tell us if that will be the case. And as I say, welcome to you at home, and do join in the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Right, let's start. Our first question tonight is from Sam Winton.
Should we just abandon trips abroad?
Should we abandon trips abroad? Are you planning to go abroad, Sam?
No, personally, I'm not. I'm quite happy being in our country. I've arranged a holiday, but obviously local. No, this year I don't think I will personally go abroad. Maybe next year. I'd just like to see how things pan out for the rest of this year. So.
We should be abandoning trips abroad, according to Labour, Nick.
Well, I don't think we need to completely abandon the hope of trips abroad a little later in the year, but I do think that the government does need to pause and think again with regard to the loosening of international travel. And let me just explain why that is. Firstly, I think we have a record of failure with COVID protections at the border. Slow in the first place to formal quarantining, slow to mandatory testing, slow to hotel quarantining, and slow to put India on the red list. Now we have a situation where we have the traffic lights, the green, the amber, the red. We've seen chaos in our airports where passengers coming from any of the three categories are mixing together, sometimes it seems for hours on end. Secondly, we have this mixed messaging on the amber list. We have one government minister saying you can go and visit friends and family, another one saying that it's only essential travel, another said that we should regard holidays as essential travel, so that has been a complete and utter mess. Now, the government should think again, what should they actually do? What I say the government should do is abandon the amber list. The amber list becomes part of the red list, if you like, and you have that hotel quarantining across the board on the amber countries and the existing red countries. Then you can move to that limited green list. There's only 12 countries on it at the moment, a number of which are not accepting tourists in any event. But we have to take a more cautious approach now and learn the lessons of the mistakes at the border over the past 12 months.
So, Nadhim, the amber list, there have been different messages, haven't there, from different government ministers. The government's now saying the amber list, you cannot go to those countries unless it's an emergency of some kind. So shouldn't it just be the red list?
Well, so the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Transport, the Health Secretary, the government's advice online all make very clear that all countries are on the amber list, but if those countries have very high levels of infection or a variant of concern, then they are on the red list. 43 countries.
Do you accept that it's been confusing?
Red list. Look, this is, as Sam said, this is not a normal year. You know, this is not a year where people, and thank you, Sam, for taking a staycation. Hence why we have to be really, really careful. The green list of countries, a limited number of countries like Israel and Portugal, and people can travel to, but actually the amber list is a list of countries where you should only travel if it's essential. The problem with the Labour position is Nick's position, and he's the Shadow Home Secretary, is one. His minister in the Home Office, Conor McGinn, has a different position on this. Yes, he does, because he wanted to basically pause all travel from anywhere, and then you had a different position. And tonight it's a third position for Labour. The reality is this is really, really difficult. This year is not a normal year, and people should look at both the foreign offers advice on travel, but also those countries, whether it be the green list countries, and their advice, because we are all having to deal with this pandemic throughout the whole world.
With respect, Nadhim, that is not correct. Our position is to pause the loosening of international travel and think again. And there's not an inconsistent position on that, apart from the Prime Minister...
How long would you pause it for, Nick?
To be frank, in terms of getting the green list into place, I think it needs a very short period indeed to get those 12 countries onto the green list. They will be then reviewed on a 3-weekly period. We know there is another checkpoint on the 28th of June. What the government needs to do urgently, so we're not talking about waiting, we're talking about urgently, sort out the mess at the airports that we can all see happening and support the airports to be able to separate those passengers in a safe way. Secondly, put the amber list onto the red list. You can then move very quickly to that green list, but you must get a grip of where
you're all over the place on this. Airports are doing that work. We're talking to them. The Secretary of State for Transport today talked about us working with the airports to see how we use terminals to make sure that people who are coming through, residents and nationals who have to come back from a red list, go into hotel quarantine.
Let's hear what our audience has got to say. Nadhim, sorry.
This is sort of Captain Hindsight 2.0.
Okay, let's hear...
No, I must come back on that. No, hang on.
Nick, just let me just hear what the audience has to say, or else it'll just be a conversation, riveting though many may find it, between the pair of you. Carlos.
On the Captain Hindsight point, and we are where we are expression. I mean, from the beginning of the pandemic, the public and the media, we've been complaining about messages that are unclear and push us forward way too fast. And then we have to take a few steps back, which is a lot more painful. And we've been commenting about this to the government from the beginning.
Okay. Jack.
And I'm a tour guide, I run a tour company, so I'm desperate to see people come back to the UK. But surely this mixed messaging is only making it harder for people to book holidays, harder for people to see their family if their family are abroad, and harder for people to really have confidence in rebuilding the economy because they don't know whether there's going to be another health scare.
Dale?
It's common sense. It's common sense that we close the borders until we know about the Indian variant and how that's going to pan out. Because it's only going to get worse. And then there's going to be another lockdown and we're just going to be in this whole cycle all over again. So like in the first lockdown, everything should be closed. The border should be closed. No flights coming in, no going out until we know exactly what we're doing with. Because at the moment with the Indian variant, we haven't actually got a clue.
OK, Harriet, let me come to you as former head of Thomas Cook. Should we be abandoning trips abroad for the next few weeks or for the summer?
I think you can hear by the exchange, and I think the frustration and the confusion and the sort of sense of we can, we can't, really, I think, causes more harm than good. So I think, as we just heard, the exchange frustrates us all. If I was the head of a travel company, I would be very frustrated in terms of you have regulations, you have a change of traffic light system, you engage with certain vacations and certain approaches. So I think there is real frustration. I do think when we come on to talk about why caution is required and what is really happening in the world and in other parts of the world that we can learn from, that some of what Carlos and Dale and Sam have said is worth listening to. But it is so frustrating.
But should we be abandoning trips abroad? That's the question.
I think we have to look very carefully over the next couple of weeks at what is happening, because there are countries that have done a tremendous job around the world who in the last couple of weeks have been forced back into a lockdown situation because of the virus being transmitted through people who are vaccinated, because... You're talking about Singapore, but I'm still not clear. Do you think we should be travelling abroad now or not? I think those countries where all of the requirements have been met, I think people should be allowed to travel abroad, yes.
Devi?
Yeah, I mean, the thing we have to remember is that most countries in the world have border restrictions. This is a debate happening across the world. And actually, if I look at South Korea, they said, don't go abroad from March 2020. If I want to travel to India today, I cannot. They will not let me in because I am not a national of that country. And so I think right now, Britain is in a great position, and full credit to Minister Zahawi for the vaccine program. But why would we endanger that by actually having open movement of individuals in and out when we still have a lot of people unvaccinated? We still have a new variant that we don't fully understand in terms of immune protection. And so I think right now we should be cautious and tell people stay at home. And also, I'm from Miami. I miss the sunshine. I miss the blue skies. I haven't seen my family in a year and a half, but we are in an emergency situation. There's massive unemployment. There are more kids who've been out of school and been disadvantaged. I mean, there are real problems. And I'm willing to say, actually, I'd rather focus on those as a society than and put aside and say, I will see my family. Until then, it's WhatsApp and FaceTime.
All right. Just anything else? Who here has booked a holiday abroad this summer? Richard, where are you intending to go, if you're allowed?
Well, this sounds very confusing for the guy from Iceland to say, but I'm going to Greenland.
Okay. So you don't think we should be abandoning trips abroad then? Well, clearly not.
In answer to Sam's question, I don't actually know, to be honest. I'm a bit confused. Either we're trusted to make our own decisions or we're not. And if we're not, it should be red or green, legal or not legal. I think what we need to do...
So you think having the amber light is confusing?
Yes. Yeah, I think we're either trusted to make our own decisions or we're not. So I think we need to beef up the personnel at the borders, and there's been some fairly concerning scenes from airports in the newspapers this week of people from red and green countries mixing. But ultimately, I think we need to weigh up the cost of the negligible risk of someone who is double vaccinated following all the protocol with tests either side against the vast impact to people like Jack. 1 in 10 people are employed in travel and tourism in this business and in this country, and it's their livelihoods that are at stake, and indeed the wider economy. I think we wiped off something like £150 billion last year off our economy because of the shutdown in travel. And finally, the wellness and mental health of that well-earned holiday in the sun, albeit not in Greenland, a week abroad, which is something to aspire to. And I'd just like to end by saying I think ultimately it's a bit irrelevant anyway, because we cannot hermetically seal our borders. Whilst people in and out of airports has dropped 95%, actually there's 10,000 trucks a day coming over our land borders to pay for things like the clothes we wear, the food we eat, and indeed all the vaccines that we're getting jabbed with, or some of them. So I think we kind of need to face reality here and understand that we cannot make ourselves completely COVID secure and safe for everyone and just seal up the country.
Devi, you wanted to come back in there?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying seal off the country. I'm saying that the system we have right now, the red, amber, green list, isn't working. You're having red and green list passengers mixing at airport terminals. And obviously the Indian variant has spread, when shows that the system doesn't work. But there are other systems. The United States and the EU are opening to people who are fully vaccinated and if they have a negative PCR test. And as you say, that's much lower risk because you're unlikely to pass it on. It happens, but it's much smaller risk. So I think we should be transitioning to that system rather than on this red, amber, green, which is just confusing. And if that means we need to wait a few more months, we'll have everyone done by mid-July with at least 1 dose, accelerating hopefully by August. So by October, there's a real chance to open up with vaccine passports across the world, which is what we've done with yellow fever. And I think this is the way the world is going. So in a way, it's just patience now for a few more weeks, and then that holiday will come.
Well, the challenge was put to me about, Captain Hindsight, but I called back in January for a comprehensive hotel quarantine. I put it to a vote of Parliament on the 1st of February, and Tory MPs failed to support it. I called out the issue of the failure to put India onto the red list for 14 days after Pakistan and Bangladesh had already been added. And I do say to Nadhim today, we can of course debate across this studio about this, but I say it because you need to get this right. The biggest threat to getting our freedoms back is a variant coming from overseas, threatening the efficacy of the vaccine rollout that I know you are working on. That's why you have to get this right and rethink this traffic light system.
We've got a question on this. Colette, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Fiona. Hello, panel. And did the government fail by not closing borders to India when they had the chance?
Colette, so we put India on the red list on the 23rd of April, a full 6 days before the scientists, the virologists, actually said that the B1617.2 variant is a variant under investigation and a full 2 weeks before it became a variant of concern. If you are traveling from a red list country, you have to go into hotel quarantine, you have to do 3 tests, a pre-departure test, a test after 2 days, test after 8 days. If you are traveling from an amber country, you have to do 3 tests, pre-departure, 2 and 8, and quarantine for 10 days.
Hang on. We're talking about India specifically.
Yes,
and just to understand this, on the 3rd of April, when Bangladesh and Pakistan were placed on the red list, their 7-day daily case averages were 33 per million and 21 per million, respectively. India's was 53 per million. So why were they not put on the red list?
So I was about to complete the answer, to say that we can only act on the evidence that we have.
But that's pretty good evidence,
isn't it? Well, let me just address that, Fiona, for a second. The evidence for people coming from Pakistan was that the variant of concern was the so-called South African variant. That wasn't the evidence from India, and the positivity of those travellers was higher from Pakistan than it was
from India. So the COVID
from
test
India.
positivity was 5% for travellers from India between the 25th of March and 7th of April. It was 6% for Pakistan and 4% for Bangladesh.
But there is a variant of concern.
So how does your argument hold water?
I was explaining to you that the variant of concern out of Pakistan was the so-called South African variant. There was no variant of concern. We put India on the red list on the 23rd of April. You can check this.
And it was a month earlier than that the first mutant variant was detected in India.
The first variant of investigation was a full 6 days after we put India on the red list. And then that variant moved to being a variant of concern a full 2 weeks after the 23rd of April. So we can only act on the evidence that we have. The important thing is to have really strong border controls. And I have to say, it's really important for the audience to understand this. And the point is really well made. You know, Singapore, and I think Singapore was mentioned earlier, Australia has found the B1617.2, which is why they're having to take further precautions now in Singapore. And they are seen as best of breed in terms of their border controls throughout this pandemic. So I think the right thing to do is to follow the evidence and to act when the variant becomes a variant of concern. And that's what we did on India.
Colette, you asked a question, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. I want to get back to my question, Nadhim. Did your government fail by not closing the borders? On the 9th of April, the cases in India were at 90,000 a day. It was reported all over the media. And quite frankly, didn't have to be a minister or a virologist to actually work out there's a problem here. I do believe that our government have done one thing. I feel like I'm in a Groundhog Day. Why do we have Brazilian, South African, Indian variants in our country? And if you remember to our COVID special back on January the 6th, we talked about playing the hokey-cokey. Our government are like a hesitant driver at a roundabout. You don't know if you're coming or going or which way you're going to go round next. But one thing is clear. How many lives is this going to cost? You're doing testing all over the country. There's cases in 117 areas of the country now. And quite frankly, are you learning? What is your plan? You seem to be shooting from the hip and have absolutely no direction. I don't trust you.
How are you going to make Colette trust you then, Nadhim?
So I'll try and have a go. One is that the early evidence is that the vaccines work on the Indian variant, and the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, bringing forward the second dose to 8-week interval is making a difference. We are surge vaccinating in areas like Bolton and Blackburn and Darwin. We're also surge testing in those areas. And I think the thing to do is to make sure we continue to vaccinate at pace. As Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, has said, this is a race between the vaccine and, of course, the test, trace and isolate and the virus. The virus will continue to mutate. We have to make sure, part of my role is to future-proof the vaccination program so that if there is a virus of concern, we have a variant vaccine ready for it. Which is why we're doing that.
That's
not talk more about that now. But
quite what Colette was talking about, I don't think. But Devi, let's hear from you.
Yeah, it is astonishing because actually by the point when we were discussing in early April, you saw New Zealand stop all flights from India, including for their own nationals. You saw Hong Kong stopping flights, and countries can't completely seal themselves off, but they delayed the entry And the problem we now have is twofold. First, we're pretty sure it's pretty transmissible, at least as much as B117, if not more. And that means the race just became even faster to get those younger people, the 30s and 40-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, people like me as well, who are just unvaccinated and are completely susceptible. So things might open, but my risk does not necessarily change because I have no additional protection. The second thing is, does it evade our vaccines? And yes, the vaccines look remarkable. They are holding up. Get vaccinated. You're in a much better position. But there's some uncertainty. And we always know with uncertainty, we have to be cautious because we just don't know. And once we know, we can act. But I think right now, our Achilles heel in Britain has been the borders and making sure that we don't have these repeated lockdown cycles. Because I think right now, domestic recovery should be the focus. Domestic tourism, getting local businesses going, ask people to fill up our hotels here, fill up tours here, go to your local shops. Edinburgh's suffering. We don't have the festival on as normal. We have lots of people here. So I say go to restaurants, go to shops, enjoy your life, but do it here on this island. We're, 66 million people in Britain? That's enough people for me to be with for the next few months while we get through this problem.
Lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you in our audience. Will?
Yeah, 6 days before the variant became a concern. I mean, that's just absolute nonsense. Coronavirus is a concern, full stop. What, you know, who cares if it was a different variant? It should just not have happened, right? I mean, we've got such close ties with India that we were always going to get a surge if we didn't put them on the red list.
Chris?
Well, Nadhim, hopefully you'll remember me from the 6th of January episode. I shared a very personal story about this lady next to me, my mum that passed away from COVID. We're not learning. We're not learning. How many months on are we now? We're really not learning. This country, you know, we have the ability, or we had the ability, should I say, it's already here. All the variants are here. The variants are affecting people and it's here. There will be more variants that are coming. We had the opportunity to make the right decisions back then. 6 days before, you know, saying the India variant was a variant of concern. How many more lives are going to be lost to this because of these decisions that are being made? We are just going to keep going full circle. More people are going to lose their loved ones. I've already lost my mum. I don't want to lose anybody else, and I don't want any of you to lose anybody else because of the bad decisions being made. Close the borders, get this country vaccinated, and then let's recover. We have a brilliant country. Let's promote those staycations and let's keep ourselves safe. Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, I think to answer Colette's question, time will tell. We're right in the middle of this 3D game of chess, and certainly where we're standing today, with a bit of hindsight, of course, we wish that we'd have closed India off earlier, and maybe delayed the spread of that virus coming to our shores. But I think, you know, we're still in the middle of this, and therefore we do need more time, effectively, to judge. But the one thing I would just like to add is I think Nadhim and his team have done a remarkable job on the vaccine rollout, which of course is genuinely world leading. And is well on the way to our ultimate cure, which is, of course, getting everyone vaccinated. I think it has been really impressive. There's obviously a lot more to do, but ultimately that's our main battle against this awful disease.
Now, Nadhim, are we going to be getting information tomorrow about quite how well the vaccination programme is working against the Indian variant? I noticed you were looking pretty chipper when you arrived at the studio today. I kind of got the feeling that good news might be coming. Can you tell us anything?
Well, obviously, we're waiting to see more information from Public Health England, but the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation and, of course, the early clinical evidence from Oxford laboratory evidence is that the vaccines work on the so-called, the B1617.2 variant. And as Professor Van Tam said yesterday, that his feeling that it's maybe a bit more infectious, so maybe 20-30%, but not the 50% more infectious. So we need to keep vaccinating at scale. The important thing is to continue with the vaccination programme.
But in terms of what we might be hearing either tomorrow or in the next few days, are you expecting good news?
Obviously, Public Health England will share data when the data comes through on this.
Okay, I'll do my best to get it out of you, Nadhim. I'll keep trying throughout the programme. Harriet, did the government close the borders too late when it comes to India?
Well, I think already...
In fact, well, of course, the border isn't closed because people can still come in from India, but they now have to quarantine.
Indeed. I think many views have been expressed. I would just add three things. I think that this sense of course, borders is important, but this whole pandemic, we are only as a human race as strong as the weakest link. And so the comments that were made earlier about the knee-jerk reactions, I think firstly learning from, I don't know how organizations will go about learning from other countries who are either more advanced or have had greater exposure.
But in terms of the question, Harriet, so just to really pin you down, did the government fail by not closing borders to India when they had the chance?
And all of last year when borders should have been shut? Yes, of course.
OK. Nick?
Yes, the government made a profound error by not adding India to the red list on the 9th of April with Pakistan and Bangladesh. And Nadhim gave an explanation about variants. That's the second different explanation I've heard from government ministers this week. The Health Secretary is claiming it's because the positivity rate in Pakistan was 3 times that of India, which the evidence doesn't bear out in any way and won't even tell us what the source of that data is. It isn't something that was said later on. People were saying it at the time. I questioned it at the time, as did many, many others. It wasn't until the 19th of April, that's the point at which the Prime Minister cancelled that scheduled trip to India that was due on the 25th. Then India was added to the red list on the 23rd. In those 14 days, by the way, from the 9th to the 23rd, we think around about 20,000 arrivals from India. It was a blunder of the first magnitude. India should have been added to the red list on the 9th.
I just want to hear from a couple more people in our audience before I move on. In our audience, it's confusing, we've got 2 Richards here, but Richard in our audience.
All these numbers, I think, are we really talking about the right thing? Do we do this then? Do we do that thing? All it is politicking. There's only really 2 numbers that are important here, and that's jab 1 and jab 2. When we had the first lockdown, we had that, and we saw the numbers decline. Then we opened up a little bit, the numbers went up again. We had the second lockdown, the numbers declined. We opened it up again, the numbers went up again. We've had the third lockdown, the numbers declined. We've opened it up again, and they've stayed declined. And that's because people are getting the 2 jabs in. My question to Nadhim would be, we know that's the only really thing that's working here. What are you going to do to even increase those numbers so that we can really all be safe?
OK, and let me hear from Hannah.
Hi, yeah, we're talking about India specifically, and to Colette's question. I appreciate there may not have been a variant of concern, but we know that the coronavirus mutates when it's in kind of in high circulation. If you've got a very small localized cases of coronavirus, you're less likely to get a mutation. So based on the numbers that we had from India, based on what was happening, we knew a variant was likely. So I think there may not have been a variant of concern, but it should have been expected. It wasn't unreasonable to expect a variant of concern and therefore to shut borders earlier before you found it. It wasn't unreasonable.
OK, I'm going to move on, take another question now, because we've had a number of people wanting to ask about this. Let's hear from Fatima Bula.
Thank you. Is Great British Railways just another headline-grabbing gimmick, or will it actually make rail travel cheaper and more efficient?
So this is an announcement today by the government that Network Rail is effectively going to be subsumed over a period of time into Great British Railways, which will also take charge not only just of the infrastructure of the railways, but also of ticketing and timetables, certainly in England and Wales. It's going to be slightly different in Scotland. Harriet, another gimmick? Is this going to make much of a difference?
Well, I think, firstly, it appears from what's been shared that the commuters were really listened to. So I think it's always good when the people who are actually using the service are consulted, and it seemed a very intensive set of what are the issues we're dealing with. I think there are 2 things from my perspective. One isn't gimmicky and the other one worries me. The first on one level of accountability. So the timeliness of the trains, the cleanliness, the schedule, there's a single point of responsibility and accountability. I think that makes sense, and listening to the inputs that have been received, that's good. What worries me is that with that single point of contact, is this then the innovation that has had more people on trains than in any other time in the last century, with the innovation, the creativity? Will that all be lost because ministers, because government, because Whitehall run the trains? So I
you're
think
seeing that potentially as the dead hand of the state, are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Nick, clearly that's not your view, in as much that the more state involvement, the better, as far as you're concerned.
Well, no, that isn't my view, but I am concerned about the gap that exists.
So what is Labour's policy then?
Well, I'll come to that. I believe in a publicly owned railway, and I'll come to that in a moment. But
exactly.
in terms of this particular announcement, I do worry about the gap between rhetoric and reality, because we've had, in 7 years, by the way, 60 different rail projects announced for the north of England by this government, and we've yet to see a spade in the ground. So forgive me for being sceptical about this particular announcement. But my concern is this. My constituents and people around the country, what they want to see is an efficient railway available to them with reasonable fares and a timetable that works. Remember, it was a disaster with the timetable in 2018 that led to this review being set up in the first place. And my worry about the plans as they've been set out is, yes, there is that increased measure, you know, of public input. It is this arm's length government body, it looks like, that is going to have this central coordination. But you've still got concessions being run by private companies. And my real concern is that you end up, as it were, nationalising the risk and privatising the profit, instead of making sure that it's value for money on the railways that we should be putting first.
Quite a few hands up here. Charlie, let's hear from you.
Thank you. Well, I was just listening to Nick then, and I think that what he's saying is fundamentally wrong about the risk. However, generally, I do think privatisation is a positive thing, but in this case, in the railways, it just hasn't worked. It's been a problem ever since it was brought in as a rush job at the end of the major government. And I was working in the legal sector when it came in the late 20-odd years ago. And the amount of fees that were generated by dealing with the private companies to get the rolling stock, to get everything. I mean, there was money just spewing out all over the place. If we can bring it back, let's just bring it back and let's make it sensible.
Okay. When you say bring it back, do you mean bring it back into public ownership?
More so, yes. I just, although I'm a great fan of privatisation, I just don't think it works on the railways.
Okay. And Fatima, you asked this question. What's your view?
Well, I think whilstsoever the actual trains are being run by numerous companies with different ways of running and different innovations, I'm not really optimistic at all. I mean, I'm in the north and we have the Northern Rail fiasco for years and years. And pre-pandemic, I used to travel all over the country, hundreds of miles a week, using many different operators, and it's just a nightmare. And I don't see it getting any better whilstsoever we've got different companies. So I think, yeah, public ownership is the only way.
Okay, Christina?
I live in the northeast, and one of the things that we've noticed is that there was a tremendous service offered by the GNER, but when it came to reallocating the franchise, the franchise was taken away from them, even though the customer satisfaction was very, very high. And since then, it's just been worse and worse and worse. Now, yes, the government makes money out of the franchises, but when they accept a bidder, they shouldn't just be looking at the highest offer. They should actually be looking at how the previous franchisee has handled things. And if, as in the case of GNER, you have somebody who's doing a really good job, they should be automatically in prime position for a renewal of that franchise, unless there is some reason why they failed or they don't want to do it. They should be given that opportunity, and then you wouldn't need to privatise.
Okay, we hear your point there, Christina. Nadhim, isn't this one Conservative government putting right something that was done wrong by a previous Conservative government under John Major? I mean, he was the one, obviously, that took that created the franchises, created Network Rail, etc., which Grant Shapps today is saying just doesn't work. Well,
no, I think what Grant is saying is we've got to learn and improve. So you look at, say, Transport for London, TfL, you've got the underground, you've got the overgrounds run by a different company. You've got Docklands is a private company. So you can have a system that can be better integrated under Great British Railways. And the bit of it that I think everyone should be looking forward to is the 21st of June. There'll be flexible travel, which will hopefully save the consumers
you mean
money.
flexible season tickets?
Absolutely. So that is a real strength of being able to, as Harriet said, listen to the commuters, listen to people who are using the railways, and come up with what I think is a better system that keeps the innovation, but also integrates it and delivers a better service and a better outcome for all of us that are using the railways.
Richard.
Yeah, it's a really interesting debate, this, because when you walk down the high street, and unfortunately for me, there are many frozen pea purveyors, and as a consumer, you can go pretty much wherever you like. But if it's the water that comes out of your tap, or indeed the train that I took from Crewe to Euston today, you don't have that choice. And therefore, perhaps surprisingly, as a capitalist, I'm actually all in favour of public ownership for monopolies. Now, if this is that, I think that's a positive step forward, and I very much hope that it gives a better deal for consumers, not just in terms of price, which I know too well, but also in terms of service. Yeah, I think it's a beneficial thing, but I'm repeatedly told by my dad that it was before my time, but National Rail was an absolute shambles. Nationalisation of trains isn't all it's cracked up to be.
You mean British Rail, in the days of British Rail?
British Rail.
Yeah.
So all I would say is that we properly fund this new facility, so that as end consumers we get the best deal possible.
Okay, Sue, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think we do need some investment in the railway. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went on a train. I live in rural Wales. It takes me 90 minutes to get to a mainline station, costs me over £100 just to get to London. And I can't even go from the south of Wales to the north. I have to go via England. So yeah, we need some investment and efficiency.
Steve?
Yeah, it seems that the private companies that run the rails always seem to be asking the government for handouts, and it just makes sense to me to cut out the middleman. If you remove the profit motive from those companies, sure, there's more money to spread around and actually use it for buying rolling stock and making the experience better.
I mean, some of the money from the private companies is returned to the public purse, it's worth pointing out. Now, David, is it going to be done slightly differently in Scotland? Because in Scotland, the Scottish Government is going to take over ticketing and timetabling, and Great British Rail is going to take over the infrastructure. Is that going to be a better system? I mean, the government's saying the advantage of the system here in England and Wales is that you'll have one body, as you like, responsible for it all. And in Scotland, you're going to do things slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak specifically to, I guess, the Scottish versus English question, but I think the point I'd like to make is climate change is a huge problem. And one of the only slightly positive things out of COVID has been a reduction in air traffic, which we know contributes to that. And I don't understand why it's so much cheaper and simpler to fly across the country than it is to take trains. And so if the government's serious about climate change and about cutting down emissions, one of the simplest ways to subsidize, because it's so expensive, it's much cheaper to fly than to take a train. And I just don't understand that right now, because that's probably, people will take trains, but you have to make it easy and simple and cheap.
Okay, we've got another question now from Martin Smith.
Can importing beef and lamb 12,000 miles be sustainable, sensible and a good deal for British farmers?
So you are referring, Martin, I assume, to the talk of this UK-Australia trade deal. There are lots of reports about tariff-free access for Australia to the UK in terms of sending Australian beef and lamb over to the UK. These are just reports. We don't have the exact details yet. Richard?
Ultimately, no, I don't think it's particularly sustainable. As a planet, we need to be eating less meat and better quality meat. And I think adding on to the huge carbon footprint of meat already by shipping it to the other side of the planet is probably not the smartest thing to do.
I mean, we do already do that, of course, with New Zealand lamb. I mean, do you think customers will want meat from Australia if it's cheaper, basically?
No. Increasingly, we're becoming British in our sourcing decisions. We're British chicken, British beef, because that's what customers want, and that's me and all of our competitors as well. I think it's maybe a bit of a false dichotomy, this, because there's a quota on New Zealand lamb at the moment, which has never once been hit. And I think that's driven by the customer. But also it's driven by simple economics. If you're an Australian beef farmer, then you're probably best following the money and selling it to your next door neighbour, China. And unfortunately, their burgeoning demand for meat as opposed to a rainy, windswept island in the North Atlantic.
I mean, Australia's biggest beef exporter is saying that exports to the UK could increase possibly up to tenfold if a deal like this is done.
I don't see that from my perspective. I don't think customers want it, and I can't see that happening, to be fair.
Harriet, is it a good deal? Is it sensible? Is it sustainable? And could it offer a template for future deals?
Well, I don't think we know enough about the actual detail of this deal, but if you think we are no longer in the same position we were in the largest single market in the world in Europe. And so there is a requirement for government to be out negotiating trade deals. We already do close to 40 billion a year with Australia. We're their 5th largest trading partner. And I think other deals will need to be sought if we are to, not necessarily for beef. In fact, I spoke this morning to Australian colleagues and asked about this, and they said, we haven't heard anything about this deal. No one here is talking about it. So,
well, some of them are, because they've been on the airwaves in the UK from Australia. So,
but the actual
anyway.
Radio and TV, because the question I asked was, what will you be getting from us? If we're supposedly getting your beef, what will you be getting from us? And no one seemed to know. So I do think trade deals and finding ways to, create markets, the trans-Pacific market that was being developed, I think you will see more of that. But I think consumers will make choice based on what's right for them about sustainable, eating locally. But trading partners with New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Singapore, these will become very much more important when the market we were in has inexorably changed, and it was the largest in the world.
My buyers are telling me actually it won't be that cheap by the time it ends up on our shores.
Indeed.
Whilst it's very cheap to produce, when you add on the transportation costs, actually our calculations are that it won't be so cheap at the end of it.
Martin, let me come back to you. You're a farmer, you're a dairy farmer, not a beef and lamb farmer. But what's your view and that of other farmers that you're talking to?
I think, like Richard said, that I spoke to some sheep farmers today and just to do some research on it, and they were saying that really Australia are going to export to China. There's not a huge amount of product that actually hits our shore at the moment. They're not hitting their quotas that are actually available to them. And it's almost a bit of a false kind of... I think the SNP have kind of stirred it up with the crofter debate and saying it's going to put all the farms out of business. But a crofter is not competing on the mass market, supermarket shelf.
I mean, it's worth saying that Mark Drakeford in Wales has also been very vocal about it, and I know that a number of farming representatives have felt that, have voiced the opinion that they feel farmers are being thrown under the bus. Nadhim, one concern expressed by some in the farming community is that if this deal with Australia goes ahead, it will be a template for other big, almost industrial scale meat producers such as Brazil, other countries in South America, for example. Is that a concern?
Well, a couple of things on that. One, I would certainly, whether I was in politics or outside of politics, feel a lot happier that it is our accountable politicians, Liz Truss, negotiating these deals on our behalf versus what deals we would have to live with and our farmers have to live with, which would be negotiated by a group of commissioners that represent 27 countries in Europe. So actually the accountability, and we're having this debate here today, is a good thing.
But will this deal be a good thing?
Well, let's wait and see what this deal looks like. It will absolutely be one that protects our high quality farming, our animal husbandry. That is not for negotiation. So let's wait to see what the deal looks like. But if you step back a second, it's actually a good thing, as Harriet says, that we are negotiating trade deals, for ourselves. And we make those decisions, and we have to go out and explain to our public as to why these things are good and how we're protecting.
But we're not really getting the details
well,
from
no,
the government.
what I'm saying to you is, until we have the details, right, we can't really have a discussion. The details at the moment are being negotiated. All I would say to our farmers is that the high quality of farming and animal husbandry is not to be negotiated. That is not to be compromised in any trade deal negotiation.
Okay. Dale?
I just think we need to start going back to homegrown in the UK, our meat and everything that we have that we need for food. That should be our first point of call. Obviously, it gets down the air miles, CO2, helps the environment and everything. So let's start looking at growing things and producing things in Great Britain, because we're a great country and we make amazing products and we can sell them across the world. So, and citizens across the world want to buy it. So let's start looking at us first.
Charlie?
Yeah, it strikes me this is a bit of a non-issue, to be perfectly honest, because as Martin said, there will be a demand for the Australian meat going to China and the Far East. And as Richard said, hopefully as UK customers, we will choose in the supermarkets the food that we want to eat. And hopefully we will choose British. But ultimately, it will be our choice. And I don't want to have it regulated by anyone about my choice, which is, again, what Nadhim was saying about the EU commissioners. Let's widen the range of what we can have, and let's make more sensible choices ourselves.
Devi?
Yeah, and this also comes into a public health issue, because part of the reason that the UK was hit so hard with COVID-19 was because we had a public health problem. A lot of people who were in the best physical condition because of unhealthy diet. And why is that? Because it's really expensive to eat well and to eat local and to eat, vegetables and have fresh meat. So for me, looking at this issue, it should be actually, how do we look at our food ecosystem right now in Britain and say, how do we make it easier for people to make healthy and affordable choices so that in the next pandemic, we can come out of this looking much better instead of revealing all the inequalities that we have already in terms of what you can access based on what is available and what it costs.
Nick, is this Australia trade deal a good deal for Britain?
Well, it depends on its terms. I'm certainly in favour of completing a trade deal with Australia, but it has to contain a level playing field for our farmers. So let's take, for example, hill farmers in my native Wales. Clearly, it's going to be more difficult for them to compete with farmers in Australia on climate, for example, on space, on animal welfare standards and environmental standards, which are higher here in the United Kingdom. So that has to be taken into account in putting this deal together. I'd expect the Australian government to stand up for its agricultural interests. Of course it would. Our government must do the same and not sell out our farmers.
Okay, lots of nodding there from our audience, I can see. Let's take a last question now from Will. Will Drakes.
So should the UK and the international community be doing more to help Israel and Palestine find a meaningful, long-lasting resolution?
A ceasefire has been declared. So there has been progress of a sort after days of shelling and violence. Nadhim, should the UK be doing more to help find a long-lasting solution? Because who knows how long this particular ceasefire will last?
The simple answer is yes, and we have been doing. The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken have worked tirelessly, one, to de-escalate the situation. Obviously, President Biden has made a huge difference, as has our Prime Minister, to urge both sides.
There is no peace process at the moment. Is there anything the UK can do with the international community to try and foster a situation where that can start again?
Well, we continue to work with our allies to make sure, or to at least attempt to try to get to a sustainable two-state solution. That is where we need to land. I think this tragedy that has unfolded, and I think it really is, Israelis, innocent children having rockets fired at them from a terrorist group, Hamas, or sadly, innocent lives lost in Gaza, and it is heartbreaking.
In Israel as well.
In Israel, absolutely right. And we need to strain every sinew, as I think the US administration is equally committed to get to a sustainable two-state solution.
Harriet?
Yes, I agree with Nadine, and I think that there's also a dimension in the horror of this that we have all seen, the extent to which fake news is used by all parties to intensify the suffering. It adds no value other than to escalate and to polarize.
And what you're referring to there is a number of videos that have been circulated online from both sides,
yes,
which have been showing violence that actually either took place at a different time or was actually
different
in different
wars,
countries.
different times.
But so in terms of finding the UK and the international community trying to find a long-lasting solution, I mean, what we've seen over the last few days has been horrifying.
Yeah.
We now have a ceasefire. Who knows how fragile that is?
Yes.
What more can be done?
I certainly think that if those efforts that you described are happening, they haven't been visible to us. So, I think that the re-establishing a peace process that, if this is not managed, the escalation that we've just seen, if this extrapolates from just the escalation of the last couple of weeks, I think it means this has to be a priority. Not just for our government, or the American government, but we need a fully established peace process to try and find a path to the two-state solution again.
Carlos?
Yeah, I was also very upset by some of the, propaganda on social media. And on this issue, like many others, I'm often left thinking that the reason why fake news is so effective is that we really don't know enough about the issue. And I think the origins of these problems, I don't think we discuss them enough in the media. So it leaves us quite vulnerable to that manipulation.
Charlie?
Thanks, yes. I mean, obviously, yes, we should do more. However, I'm not really sure what we should be doing apart from engaging. It's so tricky, but if we can try and get to a situation where we start without blaming people or either side for stuff that was done in the past, and let's just say, right, where do we want to get to and how do we get there, rather than bringing back references to things that have gone wrong in the past.
Richard? Richard in the audience?
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, I agree with that last Charlie there. Do we actually know what the two sides want here? And ultimately, I'm not too sure that we can ever arrive at a solution where the two sides can work together. And the best I think we can hope for is that each side works in their own little world, under their own little cultures. And if there is any interaction between the two, it's on some kind of guidelines that maybe we could produce something for. But to try and get some kind of coming togetherness, this is too deep rooted for that, in my opinion. And really, it's a case of let's live in our own communities and take it from there.
Devi?
Yeah, I mean, we have international human rights law exactly for this, and we have seen clear breaches of it. We have seen children under attack. We have seen medical facilities under attack, doctors, as well as journalists. These are supposed to be protected groups. And yet we have seen even today, the head of Gaza's COVID-19 program killed, which will have ramifications for the people living there. So I guess it's a deep problem. There's no easy solutions, but the international community needs to come back to that there have been agreed international law and that states need to abide by that and try to kind of get that compliance through pressure of the international community. And this is the final reflection, whether it's Israel and Palestine, whether it's about, what's happening in the States among, Black men and the police. It's just such a shame that so many of these issues, we forget the humanity in each other, that actually we're all people. We want to be happy and have meaning and live our lives. And we get caught up on religion and beliefs and skin color and our differences when actually having traveled across the world, most people are pretty similar in terms of what they want out of their lives.
I mean, in terms of the role of the UK government, you think about the ceasefire that was broken in 2014. Egypt played a major role in that. There was the Oslo Channel many years previously. What can the UK actually be doing meaningfully to try and bring together some kind of understanding in the Middle East, or in Israel and Palestine particularly?
Well, the UK does have diplomatic weight around the world that it can use. I think the scenes we've seen over recent days have been awful and distressing, seeing the consequences of the Hamas rockets that have been fired into Israel and the consequence of the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, the schools, the hospitals, hundreds of civilians dead and so many children has been truly terrible. Now that there is a ceasefire, I think that the UK government really needs to redouble its efforts on two things. I think in the immediate term, we need to get humanitarian aid into Gaza urgently and to be building the alliances around the international community for that to happen. Secondly, then, to continue with the pressure for a genuine peace process. There is no way forward, in my view, apart from a secure Israel that is safe in its borders and a viable state of Palestine. And I believe that the UK government must use its diplomatic weight now to achieve those two things.
Christina?
One of the things that concerns me most is that the stated aim of Hamas is the total annihilation of the state of Israel. That's not something that you're going to be able to just sort of negotiate away or say, well, would you be satisfied with just a little bit of annihilation on the sides? The other concern I have is that a lot of this seems to be being funded by Iran. And I think we're taking our eye off the ball here. Iran has been held down by Trump, but now I think Joe Biden is almost backing out of being a decent ally to Israel. And I don't think any responsible world leader should be backing away from a country which is only trying to defend itself in the face of a threat which is a total threat. It's not just, let's teach them a lesson. This is destruction. Okay. It's an anti-Jewish program, if you like. So let's look at where the money is coming from to fund this.
Okay, Christina, we hear you. So I'm just going to cut in, sorry, because I've not much time left, and I've just got to let Richard here on the panel get a word in as well. Forgive me.
No, it's absolutely heartbreaking. It's also a complicated geopolitical issue with a lot of history, and therefore I think at times like this, as a humble shopkeeper, it's quite important to put your hands up and not profess to have any superior knowledge to what we all read in the papers or see on the TV. The one thing I have noticed, however, is that potentially the one thing that unifies both sides is a disillusionment in their current political leadership. And then maybe, therefore, one day the strong men will step aside or step down and lead to younger, more progressive leaders who are more committed to a two-state solution.
Okay, well, there's no way we would resolve the question of peace in Israel and Palestine in just the small time we have here, that's for sure. But still, a very good discussion to have nonetheless. Thank you very much to the panel. Our time is up, I'm afraid, so that's all we can hear from you. Devi, thank you very much for joining us down the line from Edinburgh. Good to see you. To our QT50 audience, thank you as ever for coming and being such an important part of the programme. And to you at home for watching, thank you very much for being part of Question Time this evening. Until next time, bye-bye.